think, hold on. Okay, we're recording now.
Awesome.
Okay, as you were saying.
Yeah. So we were just saying that both of us have gone through some mental health diagnoses, and that we would talk about overcoming that, I guess.
Yeah.
So for me, it was ADD diagnosis in high school, and then fibromyalgia diagnosis about 3 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Which isn't really mental health, but it turned out that was the root of it for me. And so fibromyalgia, for those that don't know, is essentially it's chronic pain with no known cause.
Yeah.
It's kind of a blanket diagnosis.
And it's mostly with
Which is
females, right?
it usually is.
Yeah.
And yeah, I reached out to somebody, and they said, that's really unusual for someone in their early 30s to be suffering from that. And that helped me start thinking in terms of, okay, maybe this isn't something that I need to accept, and this is something that I could overcome.
Mm-hmm.
And then discovering the root of it, which was trauma. And we can get more into that.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So what about you?
It's so fascinating. This whole thing is so fascinating, the whole body-mind connection. For me, depression was really the main thing. At the age of, like, as a child, I was always super hyper, like, energetically sensitive and, like, hyper aware of my own inner thoughts. And so by the age of 7, I remember being so upset with my environment that I was wishing upon the star that I would die, and it's not like I experienced physical abuse. I mean, my parents did the best they could, but there was so much dysfunction. My dad was a heroin addict, an alcoholic. My mom and I lived in the women's shelter for about 6 months. At that age, I went to literally 6, maybe even 7 different elementary schools from kindergarten into high school. So I was constantly moving around. I never got an opportunity to really develop social skills. But yet, being an indigo child, I'm very sensitive to energy and very curious and very, have a light being. So like having that combination was just, it was just exhausting for me mentally. And so I suppressed that. I just kept suppressing it. And by the time that I reached my 20s, it started to manifest through severe depression. And I had 9 different suicide attempts throughout my adulthood, all the way up until last year. I was in a mental hospital last year.
Wow.
Can you believe it?
Uh-huh.
But the turning point, Alex, was not only just getting support, but then just realizing that I was traumatized. I never thought of myself as being a traumatized person. You know what I mean? And like they say, the first steps, the first stages of healing is awareness. So once I had that awareness, I was like, okay, now I can see what's in front of me. And then from there, I was able to kind of know what steps I needed to take to get to where I am today. Yeah.
Amazing.
In a nutshell.
Amazing. It's incredible how quickly things can turn around just based on, that starting point of a realization.
Yeah.
Because, and I've experienced that myself, where it was just over 2 years ago that the physical pain I was experiencing was at its height, and now I feel better than I did when I was in my 20s.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I just want to say thank you so much for doing this with me and for reaching out, because you initiated this, and thanks for being willing to come on and share and hear from me.
Oh my God, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I feel like we're in this exciting time right now where it's like we can't hide anymore. We need to start having these conversations. We need to start like showing up for ourselves, showing up for the world, because we all want to change, right? But how are we going to change the world if we continue doing the same shit that we've been doing? So I feel like having conversations like this is something different, at least for me, and I'm hoping that whoever listens to this what, listening to this kind of conversation that we're having will get an inspiration from it, and then they'll be able to make shifts, and then it creates this ripple effect. So,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for me it was similar. Although I had a singular. I mean, there's things traumatic about growing up in the society we live in, kind of no matter what, I think.
Yeah.
But for me, there was a specific uh, thing that happened that I blocked the memory of. And it wasn't to do with my family. It was a older neighbor kid that attacked me. He got me behind a garage and kind of tortured me. I had no memory of this, suppressed it, and then the physical pain I was experiencing was a manifestation of suppressing this large event in my life, and kind of being the result of that trauma was detaching from myself, including from my body. So I stopped kind of taking feedback from my body that was letting me know, like, hey, you need to be taking care of us here. And then, so my understanding of what happened is that that sort of neglect, which manifested in physical reality, drug addiction, eating terrible food,
Yeah.
all that
Suppress it,
stuff.
suppress it,
But there
suppress
was,
it.
right, yeah, just
Yeah.
self-medicating,
Yeah.
avoiding, like you said, we can't do anymore. And but I think there's a spiritual element to it. There definitely is a spiritual element to it
Yeah.
too, which was there wasn't the proper self-love. There wasn't the proper mind-body connection being made. And so my body is basically screaming like, hey, stop ignoring me.
Yeah.
Like this is your body's a good part of you. And so a few years ago, I started to accept the idea that there had been some major trauma maybe. And then it was a year and a half ago that I started to remember what happened. And
Mm.
that was very challenging, but that was the beginning of healing for me. Not at the beginning exactly, but that was where it really started to take off.
Yeah.
And then the ADD was just a manifestation of that also. Like, I was looking out the window in class because I had trouble engaging with what was in front of me because a big part of me was, being suppressed.
Yeah. So it was like a way of like dissociating, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I want to share something with you that I think you might find fascinating. Have you heard of it's a cognitive behavior model called eternal family systems?
No, I'm familiar with some family systems stuff, but I haven't heard that phrase
Okay.
eternal family systems before.
Okay, check this out. You're gonna dig this. So Dr. Richard Schwartz was originally a marriage counselor. I'm sorry, a family therapist.
Mm-hmm.
And he also worked with patients who had eating disorders. And he was
Mm-hmm.
noticing with the patients who had an eating disorders, they would say things like, well, a part of me wanted to eat that cake, or a part of me wanted to binge out, but a part of me didn't. So he was
Right.
noticing that they were having these internal dialogues similar to the family therapy. So he
Mm.
started kind of paying attention to that, noticing that he was doing it too. We all do it. You ever had that inner dialogue? Like, a part of me wanted to go out and have that beer, but I knew I should have like stayed home and studied. So he, after
Mm-hmm.
doing trial and error of like I think maybe 6 to 10 years, realized that we all have parts within us, right?
Yeah.
So we have like three types of parts. Well, we have the self, and the self is like that part that's connected to spirit. That's the part that's confident, that's patient, that's calm and compassionate. And then we have the wounded parts. They're called the
Yeah.
exiles. But then we have the
Okay.
protectors, right?
Mm.
So the protectors are okay. So this is what I'm getting at here. So that part of you got uh, that got beat up in the back of the garage, right? The moment that happened, there was a wounded part of you that was born. But then the part of you that had ADD and would use drugs, those were protectors,
Yeah.
protecting that exhale from feeling. And so the moment that
Yeah.
you got the therapy and you were able to kind of like allow that part of the ADD to relax, the part of the fibromyalgia to relax, then you were able to have those memories.
Mm-hmm.
I just think it's really fascinating.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I definitely identify with that, and also with the concept that even the parts of us that are engaging in kind of what what can seem to be purely self-destructive behavior, there really are no parts of us that are purely self-destructive. Like there, it is to protect us, and
Yeah, yeah,
same with the repression of the memory itself. It's not we're not repressing a memory to fool ourselves; it's to protect ourselves.
yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I really identify with that a lot.
Yeah, yeah, that was a game changer for me when I learned that because like the part of me that was trying to commit suicide, again, that was just the part that was trying to protect me from feeling because the pain was just so
Hmm.
overwhelming. And
Hmm.
like normally we're conditioned to shame the quote unquote negative parts, and that just
Right.
perpetuates the trauma, right? You know?
Yes.
So like once I was able to give that part of me a voice, to let it speak, to let it be heard, then the energy just started to dissipate and then like real healing began from that.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah. A similar to a way that the physical, the chronic pain I was experiencing parallels that completely. It kept going because I kept ignoring it. So it's still trying to tell me something. And this can be counterintuitive, I think, but a lot of what ended up being really healing was like allowing this negative thing to to be,
Yeah,
and to recognize that, okay, it's there, um, and recognizing that it's not there to hurt me.
yeah,
It's there to tell me something. And that's one of the things that's improved my mental health probably the most, is the understanding of like, if I have some anxiety come up or some fear come up, or uncomfortable feeling, it's not bad. you
yeah,
know that
yeah,
that the best thing I can do is to shut out, to give myself some space, and take some time to just really be with
hmm
that feeling,
hmm
and let myself feel it completely. And then usually that's it.
yeah,
And then it goes away, and it just, there'll be some uncomfortable feelings, some new ones coming down the pipe,
yeah,
but it's all for our evolution and all for our growth.
yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's like a child, right? When a child starts
Mm.
crying, you don't want to ignore it. You want to give it love,
Yeah.
you
Yep.
know? So,
There's that Rumi poem that's about this, uh, and I don't I can't try to paraphrase it, but it's basically like, um, gives a metaphor of once the self is like a house, and that these different feelings kind of come and they knock on the door. And the poem is about that, whether it's someone, whether that knock on the door is something that's there to be nice, or a good guest, or it's someone there to complain, or whatever it is, invite them in, and serve tea and give love to whatever it is. um and I think that's a really good metaphor for this, is like, we have to open ourselves up rather than try to shut things we don't want out.
hmm hmm yeah, I mean, not to sound corny, but it all comes down to love, right? It all comes down to love, and I feel like in when and that's what I love about what we're speaking of here as far as like loving our parts. I feel like it gives more definition of what we mean, or instructions of what we mean by self-love, because we say self-love, you know what I mean, but it's just we say it so generally, but like it's like no, like when we say self-love, it's like loving all the different parts of yourself, accepting all the different parts of yourself. And then again, that's why I like
Yeah.
IFS, because it made it applicable. I
Mm-hmm.
think you know what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
yeah, totally. Yeah, and I think we can even take that to the external too, and if someone in our family we're in conflict with, or whoever, recognizing that this there is no other, that this is another manifestation of the all
Mm-hmm.
that we're all part of. And so instead of saying, this is this negative thing that I'm at odds with, trying to accept and love, like, for example, just all the different perspectives in the world.
Yeah, that became a lot easier for
Yeah,
me to practice once I started loving myself.
yeah,
Because oftentimes when we
totally.
get triggered by people, we're triggered because they are a reflection of some aspect about us that we don't like, right?
Hmm. Yes. So I wanted to ask you a question, which is, what after you recognized that there was trauma behind the way you were feeling, what helped you move from that place of recognition and kind of the beginning of healing to where you are now, which it seems to be a very happy, kind of self-empowered, self-loving place.
Yeah, yeah, I'm so grateful. It took a team, Alex. I
Mm,
couldn't do it on my own. I was introduced to a community called Adult Children of Alcoholics, ACA.
mm,
So it's like AAA, Alcohol Anonymous, but it's for adults who were raised in dysfunctional homes. And it's
mm-hmm,
like, it was amazing when I found out about this group. It's like this is the book for ACA. Look how thick it is. So
mm-hmm,
it basically breaks down like all the psychology of like what manifests when you're traumatized, as far as people pleasing, being addicted to excitement,
mm-hmm,
being afraid of authority figures. And so again, it was like another roadmap to help me understand my trauma. And this is when I really started getting into inner child work, and not only understanding my inner child, but connecting to my inner loving parent. Because it's like
mm,
with ACA, our parents were just like the conduits for us to arrive here in the physical realm. But God, the creator, that's our actual parent, right? So,
mm-hmm,
so basically, so God is our actual parent, like the creator force is our actual parent. So, since our parents were just a conduit, they're not really, how can I explain this? So, by understanding that, you can kind of separate all that happened in childhood, and you can start to become your
yeah,
own inner parent and recorrect all that happened in that dysfunction. Does that make sense?
yeah, totally. Beautiful.
So yeah, it was through
Yeah,
ACA. Oh, no, go ahead.
go ahead.
I was going to say, yeah, it was through ACA, and then I just lucked out with a really amazing therapist that it's been over a year that I've been seeing him. He's 72 years old, and that's when I got introduced to IFS. So I always say, and it was my experience. From that experience, I realized that you have to have a team in place. So I have my therapist, I have my community, but then I have my diet, I have my
Mm,
meditations, I have the spiritual aspect. And now that I'm becoming conscientious about my beliefs, my unconscious mind, so it's like the body, the
mm,
mind, the emotion, and the spirit. And I learned that all those have to be in place in order to have sustainable happiness. So,
yeah,
and in the past, I would kind of do something here and do something there, but I didn't do them all simultaneously. So,
yeah,
yeah,
great.
yeah.
Yeah, for me, I had to attack it at all angles also. Uh, my gut health was terrible. And yeah, like I spent like a year basically focusing on that before these other kind of things opened up. Being open to trauma and all that stuff. It was all like I couldn't handle that stuff. It was like, okay, my stomach doesn't feel good all the time, pretty much. Let me get on that first, and that was what kind of opened it up. Um, and yeah, for me, it also definitely took a village as well. Um, there's a doctor I found online whose name is Robert Morse, like
Hmm.
Morse code,
Hmm.
um, and he has this approach to healing that's very counter to kind of Western pharmaceutical type stuff. And he basically he heals people through diet, fasting,
Hmm.
and herbs, and he really knows what he's doing, and he's healed people with like advanced cancer, people who were in wheelchairs, not in wheelchairs anymore.
Hmm.
And the way he talks about it is very spiritual, like that, and also kind of about how we need to change our mindset.
Yeah, mindset's
And
everything. Yeah.
yeah, and that, I mean, so the fasting really saved my ass a lot, and some of the practical things he was talking about, but also just this philosophy of like what is healing, and that our bodies heal ourselves, and that what we need to do is give our bodies the opportunity to do so, which
Hmm.
basically means removing stress from our lives, including this foods that are
Yeah.
more, more difficult to process, and toxins and all that stuff. Um, so that was that. Learning, finding him was a huge part of it, and it was actually, I found him from the guy I mentioned earlier, who was like kind of flipped a switch of like, you might not have fibromyalgia, this might not be something you have to accept. And he was like, check out this doctor. um and then, so I used to live in the Bay Area, California. I moved with my wife to Mexico, where suddenly it was like much less expensive to live, and the
Hmm.
food was really cheap, and
Yeah.
so I could really eat like super healthy. And then I moved to Guatemala, where I live now, and that's where like the tribe really came together for me. I just started meeting the people I needed to meet to keep healing and progressing. It was really like, it went from being this like chore, of like, oh my God, like I have to heal, this sucks, I'm not well, to into this like spiritual adventure kind of,
Yeah. Yeah. Mm.
where it was like, wow, what's going to happen next? Like, what
Yeah.
am I going to realize next? Who am I going to
Yeah.
meet next?
You become curious.
Mhm. Yeah. And something I like to share with people who are, still in the thick of it, and is that like, I used to think about where I was going in terms of like, when will I be fully healed? And that seemed like so far away, and that would be kind of debilitating to think
Hmm.
about that,
Hmm.
to getting to a point where I realized like, okay, I still have healing to do, and I probably always will, and that's
Hmm.
fine. But where I am now is that trauma that I went through is more pushing me forward than it is dragging me down.
Yeah.
Like now it's like a source of strength,
Yeah.
and motivation, and passion of like, wow, I went through this thing, like how awesome. uh and that, that's a much more manageable goal to think about, is like, all I got to do is feel okay enough that I have the energy freed up to use what I've been through as fuel,
Hmm.
as opposed to I gotta totally be healed and not worry about this anymore, or something like that. Does that make sense?
Totally makes sense. It totally makes sense. There's two things that come up for me when you say that is one, going from life happens to me to life happens for me. And then there's also
Mm-hmm.
like this sense of control that you let go when you change that mindset, because it's like when the mindset of like, oh, I'm going to be healed, I want to be healed, like in a year, 2 years from now, then you're trying to control, you're getting in the way of grace to do what
Yeah.
it says. And there's so much freedom when you let go and just be with each moment.
Yeah, I think it's hard for I mean, it's hard for everybody, but when we've had like significant trauma in our lives, there's this like lingering fear of, like something terrible will happen if I
Yeah.
don't have
Yeah.
control. Like that's where that desire to control, I think, comes from, is
Yeah.
like, I'm gonna prevent anything like that from ever happening. But it's not. Yeah, the control is really an illusion. It's like a construction of our minds that, like you said, getting away of grace is a really great way to put that.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's a process, right? Because what we're doing is basically re-engineering our neural pathways. Like we were locked into a
Hmm.
particular pattern for so many years. And when you start, and that's why like that first stage of awareness for me was grueling because I went from like not being aware of my trauma to being aware of my trauma. You know what I mean? So it just like amplifies everything. And so
Hmm.
I just like kind of like it's like sitting in your shit for like a couple of years. You're aware that you're in your shit. You can smell it. It's uncomfortable. But then like eventually, moment by moment, things start to shift and then the trust. I think what happens is like through because of time and through experience of witnessing yourself shift, then you start to trust more and then you
Yeah.
just suddenly get locked. You just get locked into this pattern where you're like, okay, no matter what happens, I can take it on because I know that I'm going to be okay.
Hmm. Yeah. That's so powerful. It really helps to, like, you've talked about God since we started, and I believe in a higher power also. Um, and I've I've found that my faith in that has been such an important part, and I really like didn't have it
Yeah,
before.
yeah,
Um, but it's like, yeah, I don't know. This is taking the conversation a little bit of a different direction, but um, so part of my experience was like, since there was this big event in my life that I repressed the memory of, it was like, who am I? Like there's this like pivotal missing chapter
mm-hmm.
uh, that made it. It was a long journey to get kind of back to myself. And in that journey, I went from when I was a kid being very, I had implicit faith. Um,
What do you mean by
and
that?
then
Implicit faith. What does that mean?
like it wasn't questioned,
Okay.
and it wasn't really like my parents taught that to me, but it wasn't like a really major thing. Um, but for whatever reason, I just had it when I was a kid. I uh, believed in God and the kind of spiritual nature of the world and the magic of the world and like the miracle of it. And then after the trauma I went through, I became an atheist. Like basically as soon as I learned what that was. So the trauma happened at 7, and when I was like 11, I've learned what atheism was, and I was just like, cool. And I had the most basic logical argument, 11-year-old argument of like, it was that the Greeks thought gods were on Mount Olympus, and surely someone's climbed up there and there hasn't been anywhere. And if their belief was bullshit, then it's all bullshit. And what I now understand was happening is that I blamed God for what happened.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
thought it was a rejection of me.
Mm-hmm.
So I in turn rejected it, rejected God. And what I've learned from this, or something I've learned from this, is that our spiritual paradigms can really be framed by trauma.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
and that's not a bad thing. Like it can be a part of our development.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so like then when I return to having faith again, it's like way stronger because I already lived without it, and I
Yeah.
know what that looks like and what that feels like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I had a similar experience. My father's a preacher, so I was raised Christian,
Uh-huh.
and everybody in my family is Christian. But even as a child, I just felt I knew it didn't resonate with me. Like I remember like asking the preacher, like if we're supposed to forgive everybody, should we forgive the devil too? I would ask questions like that as a child,
Mm-hmm.
and so when I graduated from high school and moved to Santa Rosa, I live in the Bay Area too, by the way, right now. Um, so anyway, when I moved to Santa Rosa,
Nice.
went the opposite direction. Like got into witchcraft and metaphysics and astral traveling, and it was more of a way to rebel. And then, I studied African spirituality and like all these different, approaches. And I got truths out of all of them because at the end of the day, they're all saying the same
Yeah.
thing, right? But it wasn't until, like you, my trauma last year really is when it started, where I finally was able to understand God as I understand God. And so for me,
Mm-hmm.
when I pray, I think about the awe of life. I think about the mountains, black
Mm-hmm.
holes, DNA, quantum
Mm-hmm.
physics, like numerology, all the things that man cannot create. That's what
Yeah.
that's the energy that I tap into. And my prayers have just been so amazing now because now it's authentic. It's not like a script that I'm following. It's something that
Mm-hmm.
that resonates with my soul. So, and again, I most likely wouldn't have had that connection if it wasn't for my trauma. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. That's beautiful. And that's the sort of thing like where when I was saying like the thing that was holding us back before is now like our strength.
Yeah.
Like these are the sort of lessons that are uh the ones that are hard earned. They go deep.
So let me ask you a question, Alex. I'm just curious to get your thoughts on this. So I subscribe to a truth that as spirits that we like have an agreement or like chose what type of challenges to go through in this earthly body. And so
Mm-hmm.
with that said, I feel like I chose to go through depression. Like I chose to be African American in the United States during this particular time in history in order to go through all these trials and errors to like go through like this alchemical process for my soul, to transcend to the
Yep.
next whatever's next. So I'm just curious if what your thoughts are about that.
Yeah. Great question.
Mm-hmm.
I identify a lot with that. And if you would have asked me that a month ago, I would have 100% said that I believe that. Um, I still resonate with that a lot, but I've gotten to this place, or I'm getting to this place of kind of embracing more uncertainty.
Mm.
And so I do have a kind of uh, some questions about that. And my question about that, my main one is like, looking at it in that way was enormously helpful to me in my healing, to say, okay, like the life happens for me, not to me.
Mm-hmm.
I signed up for this and that was for my growth. There's a part of me that wonders, was that kind of, is that trauma thinking, I guess? Like, is that
Mm.
like, because I think there's a way that, so something that is, I definitely believe, is that so much of what we call reality is like made out of stories, that the stories we tell ourselves, manifest into reality, and also like a lot of what we can think of as objective truth is like a story that we're telling about, what we're seeing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wonder if that is a story, the idea that I signed up for, that I agreed to this. I wonder if that's a story that was very helpful to me for my healing, but that, and so, it's a good thing. But if that's, if that's representative of a more objective truth, or if that's kind of was a really helpful reframing of things for me for a time period, and that I will move on to some other framing. So like right now I haven't. So that was a very long and complicated way of
No, 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 no,
of
no. That
saying
was
like,
no. It was totally crystal clear. So in other words, it's
great,
like
yeah,
you gotta
that's
you gotta stay tuned. In other words.
yeah, 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 yeah. But on the other hand, I do really resonate with that a lot, and it was and also it lines up with a lot of other things that I believe, like reincarnation,
Hmm.
um, like that there's free will, that life isn't happening to us, that we're kind of like we agree to what we experience.
Yeah,
Um,
co-creators.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, my wife is really thoughtful about this stuff, and she has an incredible ability of very intelligently disagreeing with a lot of what what I think. Um, and so it's that's kind of her influence is like maybe that's true, but like it would be okay if it wasn't true. And she's gone through some serious trauma too.
Hmm.
And you know what she would say? I don't know if I signed up for that or not, but it happened. It's all right.
Well, I love the quote. Maybe this is not fitting for this moment, but I just love saying it. I love reminding myself of it that it's scientifically proven that the universe is expanding as we speak.
Mm-hmm.
So, meaning that there's room for more ideas, and we're constantly. I think the story is making itself up as it goes, to a
Mm-hmm.
certain degree.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, and we're all making it up too. Like we're all participating in that.
Mhm.
Yeah. I I think I think we can it's possible to hold multiple perspectives at once, and respect, not only respect, but like also embrace a perspective where it's like serving us and
Mhm.
then not where it isn't. And that doesn't need to be hypocritical. It could just be flexibility.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can't go into this rabbit hole, but it makes me think about the whole concept of parallel universes in that sense,
Mm,
you know.
yeah.
But I can't go there. I don't have enough information to hold a conversation about parallel universes.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it's a fun, weird one.
Yeah, another one that's been coming up a lot lately is the concept of timelines.
Hmm.
That's been something I've been really hearing a lot about, especially within the full time purpose group. Um,
Hmm.
but I was like, even this morning, because I'm doing this detox. I'm on day 2. I'm doing like
Mm,
all raw food, herbs, herb baths, and enemas and stuff. And so I was like
awesome.
going into some trauma, and for the first time, I was able to like feel this particular trauma in a way I hadn't felt before. Like it was like
Mm,
on the left side of my body, near my left shoulder, and it was around money. Like
mm,
fear of money, and I know that we all have it, but I was like really going into like what is it? Like
mm,
what's the root of this block? And so I went back into my childhood because I didn't grow up poor, but my parents were working class, and but Christmases weren't all that exciting compared to other people. And so anyway, my point is that I did an experiment where I went back into my childhood and reimagined my childhood. Like imagine that we lived
mm.
in a really nice house, that Christmas is always. So in other words, like what I'm trying to do is play around with literally shifting my timeline. And I've done
Yeah.
that before through hypnosis.
Uh-huh.
I think there's something to it because it's like you're literally, everything's energy, right? Like everything starts with thought, right?
Yeah.
So if I can go back through my thinking and reconstruct my past, then it's going to shift on some molecular level in some way or another.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's powerful stuff. I'm forgetting, I think Bashar.
No, I think, does Victor speak of him often? He's like some
Yeah.
guru, matter. Yeah, okay.
So he's not a guru, but he's a channeler.
Channeler.
So
Okay, pardon me.
Bashar is the yeah, I mean only to make the distinction that he doesn't really like tell people like here's a good way to live. So there's this guy Daryl Anka, who channels this entity called Bashar that he says is like a kind of future version of himself, like a future incarnation of himself.
Hmm.
It's the metaphysics are kind of complex,
Yeah, I love metaphysics
but
stuff. Yeah, dig it.
yeah, it's awesome. So, but he drops some knowledge when he's doing these channels, and they're really entertaining too. He's quite witty. And why did I bring him up? So he talks about that we usually think of the past as what creates the future, but that if we set our consciousness to the person that we want to be, the version of ourselves that we would prefer to be,
Mm-hmm.
that our past can kind of reconfigure itself to support that.
Fucking love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's like what you're saying too, that, and I don't know what, you know, there too, like the metaphysics are complicated. Like, is something happening to our timeline, or is it more like our conception? I mean, so it's one thing that's happened to me, and I'm a little bit all over the place, but
You're fine.
when I learned about the trauma that happened to me over months, looking at my childhood, my perception of it changed like so much. And one of the main perceptions was my relationship with my parents. And because basically, since I didn't know where this trauma came from, I put it on them. Like, I assumed that it was them that screwed me up.
Mm-hmm.
And it, you know, it's complicated. Like, I blamed them for not noticing that something was wrong, which I think is quite understandable. Like, they weren't neglectful parents. I just, like, I wasn't going to say shit about what happened.
Yeah.
So anyway, you know, like this whole dynamic between my parents, and that was framing my childhood. And I kind of had this concept of my childhood being really screwed up, and it was in some ways because I was hurting from this trauma. But then going back and like reframing it, it changes who I am now, you know, like it's I think our relationship to our past in general does do a lot to not dictate, but to give context to like where we're at now. So I think that type of work is really powerful. Of like Teal Swan talks about this type of work too, where it's like imagining yourself intervening. So there's some traumatic experience when you're a child, you imagine that experience and then intervening in that experience.
Mm-hmm.
So like I've done these meditations where adult me, current me, shows up and is like, you know, hey, that's not okay, you know, and rescues the child me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, great stuff.
Yeah. No, yeah. I mean, that's, you know, inner child work really is what you're describing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, my first introduction to doing that work was through inner child work. And I did this meditation. I love this meditation where you step on a timeline and you go back to a particular time in your childhood. And so my first experience was walking into a room, and it was my 6-year-old self. And she just wanted me to do homework with her because my parents were in the other room smoking dope, you know? So like, I never really had that experience of like, you know, mom and dad reading a book to me as I go to sleep, you know what I mean? So it's like, I've been able to go back and create those memories.
You can give that to yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah.
And another thing this makes me think of, have you heard of Dr. Emoto, the Japanese chemist? I'm sure you have. The water experiment.
Oh, wait. The water experiment.
Yeah. So like, that is like the bread and butter for me, because it's like, okay, if we can shift water on a molecular level through our words, and we're 75% water, that it's inevitable that we're going to shift ourselves to molecular level. And then it's even scientifically proven that your thoughts have a quicker direct on your pH than food.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
that's cool. Yeah, yeah. Those for anyone watching who doesn't know. So this and correct me if I get any of this wrong, but this scientist had a microscope to take pictures of crystallized water after it freezes, and he would direct positive thoughts, like he would sit there and send love to the water as it's freezing, and then think hateful thoughts at a different, you know, part of water that's freezing, and then comparing the what the crystal, what the ice crystals look like, and it's like with consistency, the molecules that receive love would be these beautiful, symmetric,
mm-hmm.
um, uh, kind of harmonic patterns, and the ones that he was sending bad vibes would be all kind of messed up looking.
Yeah, distorted and black and
Yeah.
yeah.
And yeah, that's what we're doing to our insides if we're walking around with negative thoughts all day.
Yeah. And then we want to keep our bodies alkaline, right? So again, like the negative thoughts create acidity in the body. And when your body's
Mm-hmm.
acidic, then that's when you're prone to getting diseases,
Yep.
like heart disease and cancer and fibroids and all these other things. So,
Yep. Yeah, acidity had a lot to do with why I was feeling pain in my body.
mm-hmm,
Because
mm-hmm,
it was acidic, and funnily enough, the when I went to ADD and fibromyalgia, well, what are the treatments for that? It's amphetamines and painkillers,
right.
both of which are acid based, and so we're creating more acidity in my body.
That's a whole.
And so Dr. Morse talks a lot about this, like about how there's two sides of chemistry. There's alkaline and there's acidic, and that as a society, we are out of balance in the acidic
mm-hmm,
direction.
mm-hmm.
Not that like alkalinity is fundamentally better or something, like there's a dualist thing there, but
You gotta have
that
balance, right?
yeah. So and society, in terms of our in terms of mental health, like in terms of negativity and that sort of thing, and trying to control,
Mm-hmm.
and but also in terms of the foods we eat, which
The music
are a
we
lot of
listen
times highly,
to.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's an amazing, like it, it's amazing to me how I've ended up learning about so many different aspects of life and the world that we live in, and in working on myself for this, because it goes, it gets into so many different parts of nutrition and chemistry and
Mhm.
uh, um,
Metaphysics and
metaphysics and many different things. But at the same time, it doesn't even really need to be that complicated. Like really, like self-love and embracing ourselves. Like you can keep it simple.
you can keep it simple. You can keep it simple. But when you want to like have fun with it and dig in and get your hands dirty, it's the reason
Mm-hmm.
why that it can be quote unquote maybe not complicated but so abstract is because it's as above so below, right? We're just
Mm-hmm.
a macro or a micro version of the macro. Like I remember when I was
Yeah.
in biology, taking a biology class, we are studying the human cell, and I was like, holy shit, that's like the Earth, like the organelles or the continents, and then you got the plasm, that's
Yeah.
the ocean, and then you got the cellular membrane, that's like the
Yeah.
outer crust of the Earth, and so we're a reflection of the Earth, and so it makes sense that when you really dive into your health, it leads you into being aware of the whole collective.
Yeah. That's beautifully said. Uh, it's really true. Um, and that's also how I think, like, that is why the best way I believe that we can make the world a better place is just by making ourselves the best version of ourselves that we can be.
Absolutely.
Because
Absolutely. Yeah.
not only do we become able to lead by example, but also like that energy and that harmony we've created in our own bodies, uh, ripples out, and the whole becomes more harmonic because of the work that we do.
Absolutely. 100%. Yeah. And that's like where I am right now, Alex. This is just so beautiful the way that this is unfolding, this conversation. Like right now,
Mm-hmm.
like my main focus is heart coherence. That's been like the medicine I've been really getting into, because are you familiar with heart coherence at all?
Heart coherence.
Yeah.
No.
Okay. Yeah. So Heart Math is this institution that was developed in the late 70s. It was a group of cardiologists, physiologists, psychologists, and I forget what other scientists. But they realized that this is so freaking cool that the heart has neurons. The heart has
Yes.
brain cells. And they were noticing that the brain would communicate with the heart would communicate with the brain, but oftentimes whenever the brain would send a signal for the heart, it wouldn't abide by what the brain was telling it. It would make its own decisions.
Uh-huh.
And
It's
so
probably good.
it's probably a good thing, right? And so when you think about terms like, oh, he had a lot of heart or lead from your heart, you know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
all ancient cultures had that saying, that slogan somewhere embedded in their languages. You know what I mean? So there's something to be said about that.
Yeah.
And so like when you
Yeah.
said like lead from your heart, so the heart also out of all the different organs in the body has the strongest electromagnetic
Yeah.
energy. So when you tap
Yeah.
into your heart, it allows you to tap into the universe's magnetic field. So what I've been working on lately, so with heart coherence, like it's really simple. Like you just put your hand on your heart and you bring all of your energy from your headspace into your heart and you just breathe into that center. And when you connect to your heart, it like balances all the rhythms within your body. And since I've been practicing that, like every morning, it's part of my meditation. Like even before you and I jumped in this
Mm.
call, like I just like, okay, get into your heart space, because when you get into your heart space, you're in the moment, and it's what's guiding you. And again, that's where grace comes in. And I'm noticing that I'm not as reactive. I'm more in the moment. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, anyway, I just wanted to share that. And that within itself creates a ripple effect into the collective.
Yeah. 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 Beautiful. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, man.
That reminds me of this is the third time I've thought of Carl Jung in this conversation.
Yeah, Carl Jung. Mm-hmm.
One of my favorite books, his biography, Memory, Dreams, and Reflections.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he talks about a lot of this stuff, and there's a part where he's like in his 50s or something, and he's got opportunity to travel, and so he goes in and stays with different indigenous peoples to see, what they got going on. And in North America, um, he is speaking with a tribal leader. I forget what tribe, and the tribal leader is saying, like, I don't understand. They're talking about how like it's against the law for them to do their rituals, and he's explaining how their rituals are for the benefit of everybody. Uh,
Mm.
it's keep harmony
Mm-hmm.
in like, why the hell would they have a problem with us doing this? And Young says, I don't, why do you think, what do you think the problem is? And he says, I think it's because you all think with your brain. And he's like,
Mm.
I mean, what else would I think with? And he says, here we think with our hearts.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
And
Mm.
yeah, yeah, and that that really had a effect on him, and affected his teach psychology and stuff. That's why I really love Jung, is he's really
Yeah.
open to like
Yeah. Yeah. He's my favorite.
expanding his perspective. And yeah.
He was like the spiritual one of them all. I mean, Freud was definitely onto some
Yeah.
things, but I feel like Jung is the one that like just took it to more. esoteric level. He was definitely tapped in.
Yeah. Yeah. There's this awesome story. It's my favorite part of that book, where it's Jung and Freud, and they're in Jung's office, and like they're contemporaries and sort of friends, but things are kind of strained between them. And Jung trying to get Freud to, he's kind of making the, there's unseen shit at play here, you know, like we don't know everything. There's magic things could happen. You know, Freud's just like, absolutely not, none of that. And as they're having this conversation, this huge bang sound happens in the room that they're in. And they look at each other like, what the heck was that? And they look around to try to figure out what happened. And Jung had this sword in a shelf, like display, real. And I don't know what the significance of it was, but it had snapped in half for no reason whatsoever. During it broke with a big bang. And Jung is like, do you see? Like, the universe just told us, like, demonstrated to you that unexplained shit can happen, that there's more to, you know, what meets the eye. And even in the face of this, Freud is able to be like, well, no, I mean, I don't know what that was, but it wasn't anything mystical, I'm sure, or whatever. And that was when Jung was kind of like, well, I give up. Screw
Yeah.
it. You know, whatever this guy wants to think. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's amazing. When you get open yourself to the fact that miracles can happen, that the world is magic, like you start seeing it all over the place. And then you're like, how did I not
Yeah.
notice this before?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like those, I don't know if you remember back in the, I think like mid 90s, there was these puzzle pieces that came out, or like it was like some were puzzles, some were just like a poster, and if you looked at it, it was just fractals. But if you
Yeah.
like looked at it a certain way, then suddenly you would see like dinosaurs in the jungle and
Yeah, Magic Nine.
yeah. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
like that. Yeah. Yeah, it
Well,
yeah.
Misty, I have no desire to end this conversation other than that the way my internet is, trying to upload more than an hour doesn't really work.
Okay, yeah, it got a little choppy towards the end, but luckily we were able to hear everything that you were expressing. So
Great. Yeah, I
this
think
was
it'll be
such
all
an
right.
I think it was an awesome conversation, Alex. Thank you for just hanging out with me and chopping it
Me
up.
too. Yeah, this is great. Thanks so much. Let's stay in touch.
Likewise, yeah, you take care.
All right.
Okay, bye.